Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, The Problem of Identity in Buddhism and Psychoanalysis, Part 2, happened on March 24th, 2022, as a science and spirituality dialogue with Mark Siegert, Harvey Aronson, and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. This was part of a year-long series, A Year of Body, Speech, and Mind. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Facebook Live session. This is a continuation of the first one, The Problem of Identity in Buddhism and Psychoanalysis, Part 2. We did Part 1. I think many people appreciated, enjoyed, and we also did too. So we are looking forward to have this conversation. And today's mainly is going to be hosted by Mark. So I wanted to also welcome Mark and Harvey. And it's a great pleasure to have you both. And thank you for Mark to hosting this today's conversation. So please welcome Mark.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're doing part 2, as Rinpoche said, of what the problem of identity is. And I believe the best way to start this is with a video of a poem that Rinpoche wrote that ultimately is all about identity. So as you listen to this, I encourage everyone to let this sink in and let the ideas behind, or better, the feelings behind this sink in as you are thinking or aware that this is about identity. Milos, could you start that poem, please?
I am not anyone. Who are you? Who is he? I am no one. From early dawn to dusk to dark, I, me, mine, I as a great, good, high, the infinite centering of myself. All of this is not me. I am not anyone. I'm free from all I, beyond everything. Do you know me? I'm not anyone. Stuck on past sorrows, losing present joys. That isn't me. Pursuing future dreams, missing the wealth of now. That isn't me. I'm not the painful, inseparable aggregates, the weariness of unspent karma, sadness appearing day by day, nor the inner critic. Do you recognize me? Hear me? Feel me? I am not anyone. The load of samsaric stuff isn't me, nor is the prison of dark ignorance. I am not a prisoner of wretched self-fixation, nor an egoistic, declining human life. Irreparable brokenheartedness isn't me, nor is the inconsolable anguish. Terminal physical disease or the charnel corpse of life exhausted. Do you recognize me? I am not anyone. Do you hear me? Feel me? I am not anyone. Eyes that sees others' faults aren't me, nor is the blindness that misses my own qualities. Ears that hears social gossip or deafness to my parents' heart advice. Eager to age when young, and now unhappily aged. I'm not that one. I'm also not the one happy with this lifetime who hates moving on to the next. I'm not someone who loses inner peace in searching for trouble externally, nor someone who loses the easy attainments in attachment to burdensome struggles. I'm not someone who loses current lifelong friends, chasing after temporary and unattainable love. Imagine knowing me. I'm no one. I'm not someone who loses his smile here and now in seeing death while living, nor someone who loses the path to later freedom in attachment to living while dying. I'm not anyone, not my countless rebirths, not my pressing aging, not my indeterminate aches and pains, not my certain demise. I'm free of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Do you know me? I am no one. I find my true nature when I don't try. I see myself when I don't look. I understand myself when I don't study. I realize myself when I don't think. When I settle naturally in myself, I am a body experiencing empty bliss. Eyes that gaze upon pure Buddha fields. Ears that hear the harmony of primal wisdom. A heart that feels true loving kindness. I am the uncontrived ground of primordial purity, the unblocked energy of spontaneous presence, the unobscure glow of luminosity, the method that self-liberates afflictions, the gateway to self-arising experience and realization. Do you recognize me? Hear me? Feel me? I am here, near, right by your side.
Thank you, Rinpoche. I personally experienced that poem in such a beautiful, deep way that it pulls me out of some of the places and chatter that can go on in my head at other times. So I very much appreciate that. And I think it sets the tone for this discussion. In part two of this discussion, we're going to dig deeper into the concept of identity than we did last time. I'd like to start by saying that Buddhist teachings about pain bodies locate areas that need healing within the body, speech, and mind. In seeking a way to help more students to make it far closer and more personal, one way developed by Rinpoche is to encourage students to closely and personally identify with their pain. But when we're disconnected from what Buddhists call the natural state, we experience pain in habitual, repetitive, and rigid ways. But that pain can be so familiar that we don't even experience it as pain. We may simply think it's me, myself, I. And that is created when we're disconnected. To heal the disconnection, Rinpoche teaches that we must host our pain, host it in order to free it. But that only works once we've recognized and allowed ourselves to deeply experience these painful patterns or identities. In contrast, and sometimes not contrast, psychoanalytically influenced forms of psychotherapy also aim to free individuals from chronically painful, habitual patterns. But the way psychotherapy does this is quite different than the way that happens in a Buddhist context, because in psychotherapy, it's a one-on-one dialogue in which a therapist verbally engages a client to help them see and then free themselves from reacting in painful, repetitive manners. So the goals are both similar up to a point, but they diverge in a very important manner. In therapy, the goal is to live a happier, freer, and better life within the context of ordinary experience. Sigmund Freud once said, and I quote, "Much will be gained if we succeeded in transferring your hysterical misery into the common misery or into the common unhappiness." You say that again. Much will be gained if we succeed in transforming your hysterical misery into common unhappiness. In contrast, Buddhist goals are much broader, allowing one to move well beyond the misery of common unhappiness towards full liberation or enlightenment. In the second discussion, we will address these differences and consider how each of these pathways uses the concept of identity, how they differ, and whether each can complement the other. I'd like to start first by asking Rinpoche, one, why he asks students to get so close to their personally painful feelings, and then why he calls them identities. And then I'd like to ask Harvey to speak next, really asking you, Harvey, how you hear this and how you work with this. So Rinpoche, could you please start by telling us why you ask students to get so close to their pain and why you call those identities?
Thank you, Mark, for a wonderful introduction here. So I think in generally, the Buddha's teaching, it is about recognizing fully our pain, the truth of the pain, the truth of the suffering. So without that, there's no way that one can achieve any recognition of our pain, sources of pain, paths to overcome pain and ultimate liberation. There's no way to achieve unless there's some sense of recognition of our pain. So that's the principle in general, philosophically, Buddhist view. And also, I think over the years, coming into the West, I do feel sometimes that the Buddhist tradition, philosophy coming to the West, there is some kind of little bit gap where people going in the first place, going reason to go into the Buddhism is could be sometime avoiding other traditions where they came from, some having some issues like whatever issues there is, this leaving one thing and wanting to get into divorcing one thing and getting married to someone else. So it's kind of romantic idea of Buddhism, and where they are kind of temporarily able to avoid their stories, their conflicts, kind of run away, escape. And when they enter into the Buddhist meditation, there many times, of course, in the beginning of practices, they're taught to sit and relax and take it easy, not necessarily always face your problem, look at your problem. And there's a tendency to run away. I see that very often, the stories that they don't work with their issues. But some other people say that, oh, they do that because Buddhism does not encourages that, which is not true. I think Buddhism definitely encourages, and is a very important path to recognize your pain identity. Whole idea, notion of dangzin, the self-grasping, kanzage dangzin, grasping to the person, grasping phenomena, in a sense, identifying through the phenomena, outer phenomena, identifying through one's own body, one's own feeling, one's own, sensations and senses and so on. So identity is the issue here. And also a personal journey, I realize that as a practitioner, every time, anytime, when I have a problem with anything, any story, that is always connected with I. It's not connected with anything. So, which is very powerful, I feel, when you realize that, it's a very, very powerful means to overcome any conflict. For example, I mean, right this moment, everybody who is watching this, if you look at your problem, your issues, you always think it is about that situation. If that situation is not there, I don't have a problem. It's about my father. If my father was not there, there won't be any problem. It's about these group of people. If they're not there, you will not have a problem. As if you were born perfect. The problem is out there. They're just waiting for you in your life, saying when you were born, we just create one problem after another problem. We kind of line up for this guy. But that's not true. It's, if you look closely, it clearly linked with you. And how much is linked with you? How much you have to work with yourself? How much the circumstance? That's a different question. I think it's a level of recognition. It's a level of progression and personal development, transcending these things. It's a level of self-realization. Ultimately, I think everything is connected to yourself. There's nothing is caused by outside, because outside situation could be, the cause can be very painful cause, but you don't have to experience pain. You can experience so much joy where everybody else will feel miserable with the same situation. It's achievable. It happens all the time. To many lucky people, many people who are more grounded and healthy people, it can be. But who is the one to say someone is not healthy and not grounded and not strong enough? No one. No one should say anyone. We all are equally powerful in order to realize who fully we are and not identify with our pain. So that's my, my poem came out of self-reflection like that. I'm not any mean not to say that I have realized I'm no one. No. But I do feel that even reflecting on it, even having moments of when I'm feeling stronger sense of self and being aware of it, I'm letting go of. I'm give my space to someone else. I let go someone else first. I let someone else win. I let someone talk first and do first. Whatever. Anytime I'm able to do that, it's far better to resolving issues and conflicts and problems. So I do feel, particularly in the West, that in short word, that it's not easy to experience it, but I think in short word, it's what is true. Being no one is so far more powerful than trying to be someone. And every time when you're trying to be someone in any situation, in any relationship, you have a problem there. Anytime you are able to let go of a little bit what you're trying to be, you will feel more space and more means of connection and more understanding of each other. So that's my personal experience. Thank you.
It's a little bit difficult insofar as so much is getting triggered of both yes and no, agreement and disagreement, simplicity and complexity. So I'm trying to think about how to most concisely respond and further the conversation. Let me say two large things, and then maybe we can take off from that. One large thing is back to the Pali Theravada tradition. It's very, very simple, but there's so many profound and simple things in it. And this came out in a commentary to the book called The Path of Purification, Visuddhimagga, and translated into English by Venerable Nyanaponika. So one of the obstructions in that is described in that tradition, one of the last obstructions to be given up in a path of training is often translated as pride. And pride and identity are very, very close, actually. But interestingly enough, in the commentary, the word in Pali and in Sanskrit is mana. Now, interestingly enough, in Tibetan, when they translate mana into Tibetan, they translate it as Wangyal, which means literally I king. And so they, in Tibetan, kind of emphasize the puffed up version of pride. which is, of course, a big issue, pride. But in the commentary, on pride, it says this is a pride which holds oneself as lower, a pride which holds oneself as higher, and a pride which holds I am, even that I am. And this is, I think, talked about in the poem, the beautiful poem that Rinpoche recited. I think that, and that is one of the last afflictions to be given up, the pride I am. So I think one of the things that we work with so much in psychotherapy is the sense of I am lower. And one of the other things, and I think you hinted at this, Rinpoche, is that there are some people who come in who will explicitly say, I can't, I'm not able, I'm lower. But there are some people for whom that is in the bones, but they don't even have it as a reflection. It's more embodied in an unconscious manner. So one of the big issues, and I actually just was in a training on Tuesday on this, and it's kind of poignant. And it was about the significance of agency, desire, and will in psychotherapy, and how so many of the people we work with today are problematized by not being able to have agency, desire, will. And so there is a lot of overlap, especially in practice, interestingly enough. I think in what Buddhist practice and mindfulness and what we're doing in psychotherapy in terms of being able to, the practice you describe of identifying the pain bodies and being with them. One, I think, could say that a large part of the psychotherapeutic enterprise is relationally allowing one to be in their experience, but in a relationship, allowing them to hold and be with that in a way that somehow allows it to become freed up. So I think there is a large overlap in practice in a way, or in frame. But I think one of the areas that we work with, certainly I work with a lot in psychotherapy, is actually allowing people to develop an identity. People who are having trouble, and there are two aspects to this. One is a kind of a submissive identity, which might feel almost like a non-identity, but somebody who is perpetually agreeable and molding themselves to the identity of an other. This is a huge issue for a lot of people I work with. But the other is, forget about molding my identity to the identity of another. It's just being at sea, not being able to feel like I want Chinese food tonight over Italian food. It's like it's this vacuity. And interestingly enough, I'm going to forget the name of the author, but there's an article called The Pre-Trans Fallacy, Ken Wilber, and he talks about developmentally, there is a stage of development where a child is very, very amorphous and doesn't sort of maybe feels united with everything, doesn't feel like there's an I, and that he identifies with what's called a pre-Oedipal phase of development, a very early phase of development. And then there's transpersonal development, which is in a way embodied in the poem, that your beautiful poem that you read, where there is no I, there's spaciousness, there's openness. Many people who are afflicted with that first level of development, where there's a lack of clarity of who am I? I don't care if it's Italian, I don't care if it's Chinese. I mean, I don't care if I go left, I don't care if I go right, I don't care if you hit me, I don't care if you kiss me. It just, like clouds. their language, and when they read some Buddhist stuff, they feel, oh, I'm there already. I'm here. I've arrived. So I just think it's a complicated issue in the sense of even saying that identity is our major obstruction for some individuals. Having a clear ability to actually desire, act, know a sense of personhood, that is a challenge. And as a therapist, I see that as part of my work before we can go into giving up the identification with those aspects of personhood. So I just, in brief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
You know, as you spoke, Harvey, I'm very aware as a therapist too of some of those similarities. And I do think people often do need to feel and be comfortable with who they are in one sense. But I think that's almost a preliminary to being able to open up and let go of that, see that that's even an identity. So I'm not sure if people really lack identity or if the identity just is so amorphous and so hard to find that they can't do that, which is where I believe the body work that many people focus on or focusing on pain in the body, focusing on pain in one's speech, focusing on pain in the many thoughts and emotions that go through, can sometimes help somebody get centered enough to loosen the other feelings and to start being able to be freer. So I don't know if it's really a lack of identity, even though I also do use the word that sound like that and sometimes sound like I'm encouraging someone to identify with, quote, who they are. But there's also a long literature of, whether it's in intimacy, sexuality, and other areas of just simply allowing that boundary to go down, allowing that sense, I am me, to just be present. And that's what I personally love so much in the poem and why I suggested we start with that. Because when one lets that go, there's a sense of connection, a sense of being closer. But I do agree with you that sometimes it's not available to everyone until they develop, which is part of why I guess no one has a very fast path. Psychotherapists nor our teachers.
Yeah, I wouldn't invest a lot in describing as either absence of identity or amorphous identity, but I think that certainly there are folks who are troubled by difficulty in knowing what they want, acting on it successfully.
Yeah, so thank you for both. Just I wanted to say that, as Harvey mentioned, it is very complex, not easy, and it is definitely the whole idea of when someone says, I'm no one, then you're still being someone. So the identity could be so come to down, it's very, very complex. But the point I think here is the generally idea of it's not on. I mean, not from the ultimate point of view of Buddhism, but more conventional point of the teaching will be that when you, it's not a mere question about identifying or not identifying with something, someone, because we always do one. Even when we think we're not doing, we're still doing one. But the point is more about identifying with specific things, like identifying with the weakness. I am weak. Than saying I am strong. It's a very different identity. Of course, I guess the therapist will, point out those kind of allowing them to overcome one bad identity to get more connect with their better identity. So it would be better for their life, right? I am sick, or I can be healed. And I was thinking about sometimes some people do feel they'll really love to talk about they're sick. And when I listen to them, I do feel there's a slightly sense of they identify with the sickness. It's not they have some disease, but they are becoming that disease. They're identifying with their disease. When they do, I definitely do, the healing process get blocked. Or people will say, something like, I'm not good, instead of thinking I can be better. So they have strong sense of deep-rooted identity, I'm not good. Ultimately, fundamentally, I'm not good. So they're stuck with that, misery, I guess. So I have a question to Harvey and both of you as a therapist. So it's not about you're trying to not have your patients and not have an identity, but do you pay attention to a different identity? And even the better identity, not let them get stuck with the better identity also, because that was the issue also. I am good, I am strong, but I don't need to be strong all the time. I don't need to be the strongest one. The war in Ukraine is the issue of identity. Identity issue, the war started. Somebody needed to be strongest one. Who is stronger? Needed to be strongest one. Somebody needs to be the best one. Some country needs to be the richest one. The other is coming up. Identity issues, right? Between two people, the same thing. So which identity that you would, in a family, for example, particularly, people will say, I'm right. The other members' families are they're wrong. So they're stuck in idea of being right. They don't. If somebody says, I don't have to be right, I don't have to be right all the time, they must have some other collective wisdom. They might have somebody else have a little bit more wisdom than me. How much you encourage that, rather than saying you're right, that they did not realize, or rather than, how do you address these issues in real time with the patients? And while you're getting rid of one, how you are trying to be careful with not identify with something else will create the same problem. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a wonderful observation. And as you're speaking, one system of therapy, and there are so many at this point, obviously, it's called internal family systems. It's by Richard Schwartz, and he says that we all have a kind of, it's a little bit loaded language for us as Buddhists. We all have an internal self, which is kind, compassionate, clear, flexible, mindful. And then we have parts. And a lot of his work is helping people become more mindful of that kind, compassionate, mindful center that can be aware of the parts that exist. And so some parts are very controlling, some parts are traumatized, some parts are acquiescent, but that mindful, compassionate center, creative, really the therapy is oriented towards strengthening that, which when present, in direct answer to what you're saying, it's not just that we can have diverse identities, because we all have diverse identities already, but it's that we can become conversant with what what are those identities about? How did they come about? And can we start flexibilizing those identities so that they are much more malleable? One could say that he has a lot of words for this inner self, and he glibly, in a way, says that the Buddhists call this inner self the Buddha nature. Well, that's a kind of leap, because he's basically saying what he's working with ordinary people developing in psychotherapy is this mindful self, their Buddha nature. I don't quite see that we might be working with the kind of worldly or ordinary or aspects of or reflections of Buddha nature when we're at the lower development of either Buddhist practice or in psychotherapy, which is mindfulness, compassion, creativity. But the point, I think, is important, that we are really, really developing something that can allow flexibility. And one thing that I just want to say, which I think is very, very critical for our audience, and it's something that I've become more and more aware of as I'm teaching dzogchen. Mindfulness has become so important, and it is so useful. And there's now, when I started off interested in Buddhism, and psychotherapy and Buddhism were like worlds apart. And over the course of my 50 years of being involved with Buddhism, you now can't find a form of therapy that does not make use of mindfulness. And it's very, very useful. And it is that mindfulness is that mindful center becoming aware of these identities. And the practice that you're doing is a form of mindfulness, where the practice you're doing in dzogchen differs significantly, ultimately, is that mindfulness is a very dualistic practice, at least in the early stages. And so when it's taught in therapy, it's really allowing an ability to reflect on aspects of our experience. It's useful, it's enormously useful. And the practice you're describing is enormously useful. In the context that you're teaching it, you're hoping that people, in relaxing with respect to these identities, that emerge a spaciousness which is beyond either the observer or the observed. I mean, it's a tremendously profound difference in the way we, in a Buddhist context, are thinking about observation, and people in the therapeutic community are thinking about mindfulness. The people in the therapeutic community are not, and it's interesting, A.H. Almaas, who's an author, has got a book called Self-Realization and Narcissism, and well, I'm not remembering the name, but it's about narcissism and self-realization. It's called The Point. But in it, he says, occasionally in psychotherapy, the therapist and the client will arrive at a spaciousness at the conclusion of a piece of work. There's just this open space. But the client is not familiar with space. The therapist is not familiar with space. And so it's a kind of non-event. And there's a quote there about Einstein about, if you don't have a language and a theory for something, you actually won't experience it. But really, a natural part of therapy is often people arrive at spaciousness, openness, and no identification with this, that, or the next thing. It's just kind of a groundedness. But I think it's so important for us as Buddhist teachers to understand, and for our students to understand, that while mindfulness is so great and so important, there is a step beyond mindfulness, which is non-dual spaciousness. And so that is what your poem is getting to. And the poem is both a kind of exploration and encouraging. The practice you're talking about is trying to create a context to allow people to move from dual awareness to non-dual awareness. So that's beautiful. And people don't necessarily appreciate that that is a process.
So the idea here, as what you're talking about, idea of spaciousness, or you also mentioned idea of flexibility of identity. So whatever you're identifying with, which is producing pain, whatever you're identifying with, or too strong, too stuck, therefore it's lack of flexibility, therefore it's producing conflict and pain. So you are trying to introduce it can be more flexible. So whole idea of experiencing spaciousness or flexible identity has to be caused by something. It has to be caused by, for us, what we call view, boundless view. So in a way, that experience has to go back to the idea of how you see the world. You need to see the world through someone who is not stuck in anything. No one. I'm no one, therefore I can be anyone. Therefore I can experience anything. But if I'm someone, if I'm pain, if I'm stuck, unprocessed years of old pain, then it's very difficult to have flexibility and forget about spaciousness, right? So some sense of, the ability to have this flexibility and spaciousness, it has something to do with how we address the sense of I think, even though we can, even though we can say, I'm someone, but still the idea of acknowledgement, respect, the whole idea of being no one is useful, it's important, typical, like, in our everyday life experiences, whenever you feel pain and conflict or something like that, typically people would say something like that: how dare is possible my sister can do that? How dare is possible my father can say that? Or whatever. So that there's a whole idea of how it's possible that somebody can say that or do that. That is very painful when you don't know how they can do. I mean, they did already. It's not even a question how it's possible. It's possible. They did it already. They might do it again. But someone inside says, how it's possible they can say that? How it's possible they can do that? How it's possible they don't respect me? How? So who's saying that how? Is someone there who thinks I'm very important, they cannot say that. I am lovable, they cannot hurt me. I am very special, they cannot how you say undermine me. There's something there that I, and when I usually introduce people to introduce this situation to people, I know deep realization might not be there. At least I tell them, okay, for sake of fun, let's say, whenever I'm saying how it's possible, then I need to say to myself, of course it's possible. Of course they can criticize me. Of course they can judge me. Of course they can undermine me. Of course they can say that to me. Why not? Who am I? Who am I that they cannot criticize me? Who am I they cannot question me? Who am I? So if you, even you saying that for 10 minutes, you already feel, okay, yeah, I'm getting used to that. That's okay. They can say that, So, but then give you a little bit more space to say to think. Yes, they can say that. But why said they said that? What causes them to say that? How I can avoid in the future, so not get into this situation. It gives a little bit more space for a person to reflect in the situation better when you allow that flexibility in the identity, right?
Right. And one of the things I would say is that feeling, how could you say that about me? How could you feel that about me? How could you not recognize that I have these loving or kinder or better parts? That is all just the other side of the same thing. Instead of the prideful side, it's what Harvey was talking about, the sort of negative side. You've always talked to me this way. You've never let me grow. All of those kind of thoughts. We do try to find space. I think I love that word for therapy as well as for the practice, because we are seeking space. We are seeking a way to help others feel more space. I remember a story I had, and mindfulness is becoming, because of where it grows in our culture, in some ways its own problem. I some days I sort of kiddingly say at every street corner there's going to be shops that say mindfulness, and you walk in and you get that version. But I remember someone telling me a story that they went to a mindfulness retreat. This person was in crutches, had just broken a leg, and was trying to carry their food into the cafeteria with a tray. And people trying to practice mindfulness were completely oblivious that the person needed the door held open and needed a hand. So it became almost ironically a place for being self-centered and very disconnected from the space and what's around and aware. So I definitely hear that. I definitely, and I love, Harvey, you pointing out that it is dualistic. By definition, it's dualistic.
So one thing I'd like to say in response to the example you just gave, Rinpoche, which I think is a beautiful example, and it's very, very often that we would hear that kind of conversation. So what you're offering, what you're describing, we in the therapy world would say is a kind of cognitive intervention. It's using the mind to work with the mind. I, in that particular situation, just for a contrast, would operate as follows, and this is informed by emotionally focused therapy, couples therapy. So when your partner does that and you get this feeling, how can they say this to me? Can we let go of the story about them for a while? And this is the hard part. This can take weeks, months, and years to actually get to work. But can we start looking at what's going on inside of you when they've done that? What are you feeling? And usually it's some kind of, I don't feel loved, I don't feel seen, I don't feel respected. So can we get to that soft, which in emotionally focused therapy, we would call that, how can they do that? How can they do that? It's kind of a fight. You either get fight, freeze, or flee. These are the reaction patterns. But those are secondary emotions. The primary emotion is, I'm vulnerable, I'm not being seen, I'm not being respected, I'm not loved. And what does it feel like? And this goes to the practice that you teach. What is that painful sense of your experience of not feeling loved, seen, or respected? Can you be with that? And can you just let me know, what does that feel like in your body? What are you feeling in your emotions? Very, very hard to actually do for most people, especially guys in our culture. But when they get it, and then, can you speak from that? Namely, when using an assertive model of communication, when you do that, I feel unseen, I feel unloved, I feel unappreciated, I feel unrespected. It's amazingly transformative in terms of both the experiencer and the partner. And so in terms of functionality, I don't look at things in terms of right or wrong, just in terms of functionality. We can bring people, and when I do this for myself, I can bring myself to such a richer sense of my own experience and really being able to be with another person and let them know in a productive manner how they're affecting me. So, but it's very in line with what you're describing in terms of be in touch with your pain identity. Can you have enough spaciousness to touch into the sense of, oh my God, when you say that, I feel unloved. I feel like
so maybe the follow-up question to both of you, particularly Harvey, what you just said. I think so the same story, like how it's possible you can say that I feel unloved, unrespected, unacknowledged. When you introduce that in therapy, and in the sutric version of process and tantric version of process and dzogchen version of process or psychotherapy version of process, I think it's quite different approaches there. So how much you trying to be, particularly Harvey, how much you're trying to be aware that okay, when you say now I do feel someone here been hurt or not acknowledged, how do you work with that identity conceptually or emotionally, or stories, or how much you in psychoanalysis, I mean, usually you work with conceptually, emotionally, and maybe even the body and psychosynthesis. But from the dzogchen point of view, how much you're trying to work, or you are able to work, or you have success working with what we call direct liberation. So as you said, it takes days and weeks and months and years. But do you think, as in the dzogchen explains, it could take a single moment of realization that when you don't get into another story or better story, or story even you think is not a story, that some direct recognition? Do you ever try, or do you have ever some experiences with that?
So it's a beautiful, great, excellent question. And maybe there is somebody out there who does this or could do this differently. But, it's a little bit from my own personal experience and from working with students in Dzogchen. There may be some students who we explain Dzogchen to who get it immediately, but most of us, it's a lot of sitting, and doing the diverse practices that we've been guided to by our teachers, that we get to a place where there can be that kind of instantaneous realization or that momentary liberation. But that momentary liberation seems to, for many people, take some time of practice. And so, as a therapist, just speaking candidly, I'm not expecting my clients, I mean, it could happen that somebody could move through an emotional process very, very quickly. And sometimes that may happen, but my own experience in, let's say, working with couples therapy, it's actually often very, very hard to just even do that switch from, can you give up talking about your partner and start looking internally at what you're feeling? No, I want to tell you how bad this person is and how unjust they are. And, we need to fix, no, can you just, and that can take days, months, and years just to look inside and gently and compassionately feel, what am I feeling? Most of us today look outside. I mean, it's all outside. And so to turn internally and then to actually experience, we don't, this is our realm of experience now. This is not the realm of, this is the realm of experience. So to actually become familiar, even the experience, the practice you're talking about is being with your own pain. Golly gee. I mean, I don't know if you find students like this, but I've certainly had very engineering-oriented clients, and I've said, "What are you feeling in your body?" And they're like, "What are you talking about? I'm not feeling anything in my body. There's nothing." And they're sitting there like, and it's clear they've got tension up and down their body. So even allowing people to start orienting internally, none of what's being said is untrue. I think it's all a matter of time and circumstances. How do we foster these kinds of situations where the kinds of realizations you're talking about can occur? And part of it has to do with, as you said, the view. I mean, if you haven't been taught the view, typically you're not going to be oriented towards recognizing the view. So,
what about like just generally, there's 2 points. I think one is psychoanalysts influence psychotherapy, maybe different kind of psychotherapy. Some are very Buddhist oriented, mindful oriented, but generally, overall speaking, there's a tendency in the West psychoanalysts that things will take so long time. And so the whole idea of instant realization, just forget about it. Even it's just even not in our mind, just trying or hoping. So when you come with the place of not even hopeful, it's possible. don't you think it might interfere also sometimes for therapists to say, maybe we don't have to analyze as much as we do. Maybe what about the couples can come, what you do, you're like the refuge tree there. You just sit there and just trying to be very spacious, still, silence, very spacious, very warm, and let them come and they sit, let them sit, hold each other's hand for a moment, let them look at each other's eye, let them just hold their hand with each other, be still for a moment and see what comes out of that stillness, rather what comes out of that silence, rather than what comes out of that conflict conversation. So the whole idea of respecting more to the stillness, silence, spaciousness, there might be more better solution and better insight there than long, complicated discussion. Both two people have sometimes even therapy has his or her own complex idea on the third one. Three get mixed together so much,
Yes, absolutely, Rinpoche.
Sometimes we do exactly what you described. Just ask
right.
people to
Yes, and I do ask people to hold hands, sometimes in couples therapy, or put their arms around one another and try to look or connect. So I do think in therapy we get a taste. We can get a taste of the spaciousness, but it's really just a taste. And there are moments that, and Harvey described it earlier, that you see something and there's a quiet that comes over. But it is, and that's a lovely, lovely moment. But I do think, Rinpoche, you're absolutely capturing something that's very common in psychotherapy, which is when someone says very little, the first instinct we can have is say more. And then when they try to get quiet, say more about that, or where are you right now, or what are you doing? So I don't think therapists are very, we aren't trained and very rarely comfortable just sitting for terribly long periods of time, unless that's a kind of technique that's done on purpose. I think it's actually, it's an important observation, and I agree with you.
So certainly silence is part of what I'll exhibit or be with. And also the issue of there might be a sudden change. It is certainly the case that I think any of us who work with people can get attached to a framework that, oh, this is going to take a long time. And I mean, I think we need to be both open to the possibility that things could change very, very dramatically and quickly, and that they may not.
That's right. And Rinpoche, I would add to that. I think it's not that different between therapy and the practice, because we're always listening for something that can be very subtle, just like in the practice, where we can be open to the subtleties that can help us get closer. I can have a patient I did this morning where someone who tends to always be angry and railing, who just all of a sudden you hear a quiet, you hear a tenderness, you hear a softness, very subtle, but that's exactly where you want to stay. And that will lead me to more and more silence while they can do that. It's occasionally making sure they know that I'm there and I'm listening to them. I think this has been a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate everyone's doing this here. And I know some of our audience planned on only an hour, so we ran a little over. But thank you all. Thank you, Rinpoche, for organizing this.
Thank you,
Harvey.
thank you, Mark,
Wonderful.
for hosting beautifully, and thank you, Harvey. And I look forward for the next session.
To be continued.
Okay, bye.
To be continued. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.